If you want to make crystal clear beer, there's really only two things that you need to do. Now, if you're a home brewer who's had this question, especially in the last couple of days, you've probably seen this video floating around. It was done by the Apartment Brewer Steve, and it does break down all the things that can be done in the brew process to make really clear beer. But, and I know what you're thinking, oh my God, Peter, I know you're about to lay out an incredible bit of information, but how could you possibly add on to such a well laid out piece of content told by a handsome man with such burly arms and piercing eyes that look right into your soul when you stare at them? And what was that? I don't want to leave. But hey, the first thing that you should do if you want to make really clear beer is do a really long boil. A lot of people go into the chemical aspects of what can make clear beer, but a lot of people don't talk about mechanical breakdown. And if you've enjoyed cooking at all, you know that a lot of things mechanically happen just by applying heat. Two of those things that happen in your boil are it will denature proteins over long enough time, and it will also tear apart starches that can be haze forming. So just the fact that you have heat applied will eventually rip apart molecules that can cause haze. And so if you do a really long boil, you're actually breaking out a lot of stuff that can cause haze forming proteins. And by a long boil, I mean like 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. And what's good about this is you're also creating compounds over a long enough period of time that will help keep your beer more shelf stable. They'll create some flavors. They'll do a lot of cool stuff. Steve did talk about how you hit hot break, and hot break breaks out a lot of those proteins. And so he did talk about mechanical breakdown a little bit. But I wanted to re-emphasize that heat is actually tearing apart things that will cause haze in your beer. It's not just what comes from the hot break. There's a lot of things that continue to happen after that. And he also talked about filtering a lot of that gunk out when you go into your fermenter, but just laying out, you want to filter out all that gunk that breaks out when you go into your fermenter, so you've got relatively clearish stuff going in there. Now, the second thing that can cause really clear beer is just picking your yeast correctly. And this kind of comes in two different forms. Some yeast will actually also chomp and tear apart and create enzymes that will make your haze-forming starches and proteins break apart and eventually either get eaten by the yeast or settle out. That is one way that over time your beer will become less hazy or not have the ability to be hazy, even without just the long lagering period. The second thing, and this is probably something you've heard about before, is something called flocculation. There are yeasts that like to, when they're doing their thing, eventually stick to one another, especially when they're out of food to eat. And in doing so, they create a little bit of a polar wall that will also grab some of the things that cause haze, and you'll end up with a heavy enough molecule that it's going to settle to the bottom of your beer. So when you rack your beer into your final vessel, your bottles or your kegs, then you can actually leave a lot of that haze-forming stuff behind and end up with some pretty crystal clear beer. This will also help in bottle conditioning because the cake in the bottom of your bottle will also be more compact. Whereas even if you've got a really, really clear beer going into your bottle, if your yeast is a little bit, haze-forming, if it's not high flocculating, then when you bottle conditions, it can also kick back up some haze and make it so that your final product is still not super clear. All that to say, take that, Steve, suck a butt. And I texted you last night. You still haven't returned my text. There's nothing serious. Like, it's totally fine if you don't want to respond. But I miss you. If you look right here, this is where I'm going to put Steve's video. If YouTube lets me link it, you should check it out. It actually has a lot of really good information, and Steve does a way better job than I do of breaking that stuff down. Subscribe to us. That'll be a different button somewhere. Check out some more of our videos. Goodbye.